We now fast forward to 1911, to this photograph of three men standing outside a hut in the darkness. They're obviously about to go somewhere. From the left we have Birdie Bowers, so named because of his nose, Edward Wilson in the middle, hero of our story, and Apsey Cherry Garrard, assistant zoologist known as Cherry. They are about to go on what's been called the winter journey. Now, the aims of this journey were threefold. Firstly, obviously, was to get that crucial penguin's egg, and they're going to Cape Crozier to look for it. Secondly, Scott wants them to explore the differences of all the rations that they're going to take and work out what the best arrangement of carbohydrates, proteins and fats is going to be for the polar journey. And thirdly, they've been asked to collect meteorological data on the barrier to see what winter conditions will be like when Scott's returning from the pole. The only trouble with this, of course, is that it's winter. It's pitch black. For a start, there is no light except from the moon, the stars and the aurora. The temperature is uniformly dismally low. The average is about -50 centigrade. The worst they get is below -60 centigrade. And finally, it's a 130-mile round trip. Now, these gentlemen do not, in my opinion, look half worried enough given what they're about to experience, but Edward Wilson in the middle did at least confirm that he thought they were probably in for a regular snorter. So, on June the 27th, 1911, they set off with their two heavily laden sledges to Cape Crozier to look for an egg. The weirdest bird nesting journey that has been or will ever be, as it was called. They ran into trouble fairly quickly. Cherry developed bad frostbite blisters on his fingers, and the pus in those fingers froze. Their clothes started to ice up, so that they couldn't move properly unless they got into position before their clothes froze around them. Their sleeping bags started to freeze up, so that they had to beat their way into their sleeping bags before they could go to sleep at night. And then when they did, they lay there shivering for 7 hours in their ice cocoons before they could actually go to sleep. They also hit a nasty area called Windler's Bight, where the wind had not swept away the surface snow particles, so it was like trying to pull their sledge through thick, soft sand. So what they had to do at that point was relay. Pull one sledge forward a mile, come back, get the second one, pull that forward, travel 3 miles for every 1 mile actually maintained. Cherry reported in an account he wrote later that it was difficult not to howl. He developed a mantra for himself to keep himself going. You've got it in the neck, stick it, and they all dreamed of sweet foods. It took them 19 days to go about the 60-70 miles to Cape Crozier, where the penguin colony was. When they got there, they built themselves a stone igloo, just below the top of a ridge where they thought they would have protection from the wind. And then they went off to look for the penguins. After many trials and tribulations, they did actually manage to get hold of 3 eggs and bring them back to their igloo, which was good because that was the last opportunity they were ever going to get. The following night, a hurricane blew away the tent that they'd pitched near their igloo with all their kit in it, and blew the roof off their igloo while they were still in it, thus cocooning them there for 48 hours without food, water, or any actual notion that they were going to survive. They thumped each other for 48 hours to make sure that they weren't actually dead, and sang hymns. When they finally escaped from their igloo, they miraculously found that their tent had folded itself up like an umbrella and had deposited itself a short distance away. Without that, they would not have got home. They would have frozen to death en route. It took them a mere 7 days to get home, fortunately, not the 19 on the way out, because they were also running out of fuel. And they kept bumping into each other on the way home, falling asleep because they were so tired because of their hideous frozen sleeping bags. When they got back to the hut at Cape Evans, where the base was, the men had to cut them out of their clothes because they were encased in armour, so ice-covered were they. And Ponting, the photographer, thought that they looked like half-starved Russian prisoners of war. Their sleeping bags by this stage weighed over twice what they had started off as because of all the frozen condensation inside. And for all this, they'd managed to gather a mere 3 eggs. When Cherry Garrard got back to Britain after the end of Scott's expedition, he took these 3 eggs to the Natural History Museum, to the ornithological department, where a curator took them in without a word of thanks, much to Cherry's disgust, because he knew exactly how much had been suffered to collect them. Now, Wilson probably wouldn't have minded, because he was all for the pursuit of truth without reward, and as they had gathered eggs, that was the important thing. Thanks did not matter, but to Cherry it was a very, very great disappointment. Later on in the 1920s, he wrote what is now one of the most famous accounts of Scott's journey, called The Worst Journey in the World. And as its centrepiece of the book is his account of the winter journey, which is where we get our most graphic account of its horrors from. Somehow he managed to convert the whole book into a metaphor for the triumph of the human spirit and the abnegation of self that was so important to Wilson, as a very firm believer in God. And he wound up the whole book with the fantastic quote, "If you march your winter journeys, you will have your reward, so long as all you want is a penguin's egg."